Okay, we could get started, Ian. This session will be recorded. I think everybody that joined the session probably got the little confirmation to tell you that we're recording the session. I believe after the session's over, you'll get a link to the session. If you wanted to share it with your colleagues, please feel free to do so. You could always find us on the line afterwards as well. If you had some burning platform kind of questions, Ian and I are relatively accessible. So let's get started. First of all, welcome and thank you for taking the time. Like I said, it's around 11:30 US Eastern time, 9:30 for the people in the Pacific time zone. It's mid-afternoon for people in Europe, and if you're in Asia, we thank you for staying up really late. So as I used to say, I used to run a global business working for Adecco. I used to say good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and good night to everyone, depending on where you are. The world is flat. So my name is Mike Beygelman. I'm the VP of Product for Wilson HCG. I was a founder of Claro Analytics. We recently were acquired by Wilson HCG. Claro is a labor market data platform, and in simple terms, we just help companies make more strategic decisions about talent. Today, I'm joined by Ian Cook. Ian and I randomly met online many moons ago, kind of became friends. Ian, you want to introduce yourself real briefly?
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of that friendship is based around a shared passion and interest for people data as it relates to business. So whereas Claro has an amazing capacity to look at the outside market, what Visier does is help organizations access, use, and get insight from their internal data. So our offering to clients is to organize all of their crazy people data and start to deliver business insight very quickly and very powerfully. So our interests are shared and our kind of offerings go hand in hand.
Yeah, you also find Ian and I bantering on LinkedIn from time to time about deeply ethereal topics. So feel free to jump into any of the mealies as you see we debate things. Ian actually has a really good thing that I follow every Thursday. He has the Great Thursday Debate. He writes a very well thought out post, and it usually gets a lot of feedback and input. So Thursday's right around the corner, right? I suggest everybody go connect with Ian on LinkedIn and follow his Thursday debates.
Thanks for the shout out, Michael.
Yeah, for sure. Quickly, our topics of discussion. I didn't want to call it an agenda. We kind of have no agenda. Our hope is to do a little what we call edutainment, which is a little bit of education, a little bit of entertainment. And hopefully when you leave the 30-minute session with us, we'll create some intellectual curiosity for you to go and explore more things that are data-centric about the world of work. So our topics of discussions today are going to get basically peppered around hiring and salary trends. We'll talk a little bit about job-seeking activities and resignations. And these are kind of salient topics. If you read the newspaper today, or if you scroll through your social feeds in the last couple of days, all these topics are the things that people talk about: workforce supply and demand, how to use data to help make strategic decisions, and etc. We thought a good way to kick it off would be to actually do a quick poll. So I'm going to launch this poll. So hopefully, if the tech works really well, you'll see something pop up on your screen, and it'll ask you to provide some feedback. So this poll basically asks the following question: do you think that the recession is going to swing power back to employers? This is a debated topic, so we'd like to kind of get your feedback. So if you would click your thoughts on the little poll, that would be really great.
It's definitely a hot topic, Michael. I was just reading a report released from folks over in the UK, Insight 222, who study the use of people data. One interesting finding from that was 80% of the teams that they're working with are doing work for the board. And like, if we're looking at our discussion topics today, they used to be kind of, stuff in the closet because people were not really thinking about people. But I think the topics we've listed are the board conversations that are happening around how do we keep our business going. So it's definitely sort of evidence of the prevalence and importance of these questions.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm not letting you all off the hook. Everybody better answer this question. I think we have one or two laggards. There's a price that you have to pay for participating in the webinar with Ian and Mike, and that price is called participation. It's a very small price to pay.
And we don't know your answers, so just love them.
And we don't know your answers. This is correct. It's totally anonymized. You won't get any nasty grams from either one of us afterwards. Okay, I think we have an 88% participation rate. So for the 12% that didn't participate, we need to speak afterwards. I'm going to end the poll, and I'll show the poll results. So let me share the results with you here. And you see that more than half of you disagree that the power is not going to swing back to employers. 38% of you are very honest in saying, I don't really know, not my realm. And 13% think that the power will swing back to employers. So really interesting data. By the way, I think in a post follow-up, I think you'll get like the survey and the poll questions answered as well. It may be just like interesting, get anecdotal information to share with your colleagues. So let me hide this poll. I want to quickly jump into showing you some really interesting data, because this is a call about data. I had worked tirelessly over the last couple of days because I'm a data geek and I have some intellectual curiosity. I wanted to share, first of all, a little bit about sort of like the myth and the reality of the labor market. Unfortunately, if we listen to too much news, we remember what we heard that morning. And then based on what we remember what we heard that morning, we have this view of the labor market. So I wanted to show you at the super highest level, what's kind of happening in the labor market. This is the demand for labor over the course of the last year. So let's start in the last 30 days. The blue line here represents the demand in the US. I'm assuming that a decent number of people on the call are from the US. The orange line represents the demand for labor globally. As you can see, really, over the last 30 days, nothing's really happened. If you look over the last 60 days, there was a slight dip, but it kind of is just like back to where it is, if not slightly higher. If you look over the last 90 days, we kind of remember this and we go, oh, the world is ending, that's it, no one's going to be hiring, etc. But if you look over the last 360 days, something super interesting. If you look at exactly a year ago to the day, on October 25th, there were about 23.5 million jobs outside of the US, and today there are 23.4 million jobs. So in the course of a year, what happened? Basically nothing. We're back to where we were a year ago. If you look in the US, there's roughly 8 million jobs, and where are we today? Roughly 8 million jobs. We saw the ebbs and flows throughout the year, but really at the end of the day, we're basically back to where we were a year ago with a little bit of volatility in between. And I'll show you a couple of more charts, and then Ian's got some really cool insights to share with you from a report that Visier does. This is another thing about like the job hopping thing, right? Like more people job hop, less people job hop. This is all like anecdotal kind of information, right? We measure job seeking trends. This is the percentage of the workforce that has passive job seeking activity. So these are the people that are, prepping their profiles, poking around, and, potentially considering a jump. The blue line represents a year. So let's go back and look at 30 days. So the blue line represents the last 30 days in the US. The orange line represents the last 30 days globally. If you see globally, outside of the US, people do have a little bit more job seeking activities, but not significantly. And what's really interesting is this kind of like, oh, in the last 60 days, oh, the great resignation's real, everybody's quitting, correct? If you really look at it over the last 90 days, kind of flatlines. But if we go back to the year view, you'll see that the trend line is basically flat. You'll see that in the US, roughly 3.3% of the people have job seeking activities. And if we look at this outside of the US globally, it's roughly 4.5. And so this idea that people kind of proliferate into the market that, oh my God, 75% of the people are ready to jump, the data just doesn't really support that point of view. The data supports a much more pragmatic point of view. And what's interesting is we provide you a view of external data. And Visier has some really cool insights about what's been happening in the company. So Ian, do you want to share your screen?
Yeah, I'll grab the screen share over here, Michael, and we can pivot into to what Visier has. So again, I think interesting to see the people's responses to the poll. One of the reasons we wanted to have that poll is to understand, are we, what are we aiming for in our conversation today. And so clearly most of the folks on the poll are either I'm confused and skeptical of what they're reading in the press, which I think is a really healthy standpoint. Other folks probably have some sense of the data and some sense of like, no, it's not going where the general press would have you believe, because if you read, you know, BLS or various other players, everybody's suggesting that the sky is falling. And I was talking with Michael yesterday, and it's kind of like when you go outside on a 30 Celsius day, or let's just say 100 Fahrenheit day, you walk back into your house and your house is a, you know, comfortable 20. Your house feels cold because you've been in a relatively hot space and you're now going into just what's a temperate space. That's how we would describe what's going on in the labor market. What we're looking at here is actual resignation data. So again, this is not a survey-based approach of, do you expect to resign? Are you going to change jobs? You see a lot of that in the press. Lots of people ask for intent to leave. What Mike and I both detect isn't intent, it's actual behavior. It's the real event. It's the series of activities that lead to this. So this is built out of Visier's 15 million employee records, and we're averaging or aggregating across the US population the actual people who turned that job-seeking behavior into a new job, which led to an exit event. And we've got the same pattern. We're back, this is October of, well, this is going back 2 years, October of 2019. We're basically at exactly the same resignation rate. And again, I've got the data that goes back further, but those of you may not know, but 2019 was already a peak year. A steadily rising trend through those prior years had meant that 2019 was a peak year. So yes, there's a decline, but that's also fairly common seasonally. You'll see the same, you know, peak to drop. That's like everybody changes jobs in the summer. That's again a kind of aspect of the seasonality, but the sky is not falling. Retention has not stopped being an issue. Retention has not been something that's fallen off. What tends to skew, and again, this is where Michael and I are both really keen, like you have to look at the precision in the data for your segment, for your industry. You can't take the theme in the press. You have to understand it for your area. Because if I go back into high tech, that's a lot of where the story is coming from. A lot of high tech had aspirations of growth that didn't pan out because they were sort of funded by the behavior in the pandemic. They flattened. So that's where one of the areas where resignation is pulled back. There is less job hopping in tech, but in terms of retail or manufacturing, the pullback is not so great. It's not as substantial. The other thing that's been happening is this reduction from tenure. Again, the what's it called? Boomerang employees, that rapid recycle and movement quickly, the kind of rapid job hopping. That's one of the areas that's pulled back. That was peak behavior. That was not quite freak, but it was an anomaly in the behavior. We've kind of just gone back to normal high rates as opposed to the peak. So again, just starting to understand that this data is available. I'm on a Visier website called Resignation Report. Anybody can go hit it. And that this data starts to get you granular around like which parts of my population who are in it. Again, you know, typically this early age group is a high cycle. We're working out what our jobs we want to do. We're working out how to make our livelihoods. We're jumping around a lot. We've seen sustained levels, fallback, but sustained levels across these older age groups. So there's a huge part of this, which is don't take the headline from the press. Recession does not mean job collapse. We're going to be going through a talent-constrained economic slowdown, probably even a talent-constrained recession. That's going to be different. You're going to have data to be able to navigate it effectively. So where do you want to go next, Michael? I think, you know, again,
I think just double click in that area, like pragmatically speaking, like companies will need people in order to grow. It's just this, I know it sounds like really simple, right? It's like simple truism, but I mean, I watched really over the last 30 years, I don't have a lot of hair, so, you know, I've been at it for a while, but I've watched really over the last 30 years, you know, we went from like a very low productivity, you know, country really, or region, to like a very high productivity region, to the extent that now productivity isn't really the topic anymore. It's burnout. Usually when we start talking about burnout, this is like like the cycle, you go from denial to anger, this thing. So I think it's very similar that when we start talking about burnout, that means we've kind of like peaked at productivity, which means that, companies could basically, like, I hate to use the term, but kind of like squeeze the lemon about as much as the lemon can be squeezed, right? And ultimately, they will need people to do the work. So you see like a lot of narrative around that. And recently, we did some research that we published. I'm not sharing it here. You can check it on site. But, is there potentially a flight to safety? Like that, why is the churn happening? And this is, I think, something that is a little bit of a black box. Like, we know that churn is happening. We know that people job hop. The whys are kind of anecdotal, but I wanted to kind of get your take, like, on the spot. Like, what are your thoughts about, like, is the churn happening because people are seeking tremendous upward mobility? Or do you think your churn is happening because people are saying, hey, we're heading into winter, like not to quote an HBO series, maybe we should hunker down for a little bit.
No, what we've seen in terms of the job mobility, Michael, is probably broken down into 3 to 4 categories. Because I think you're totally right. Like, trying to name this as one thing leads to all resignation is folly. And so what we see is that early generation were doing a lot of job hopping and trying to maximize their opportunity early in their career. Good on them.
Earnings,
who wouldn't
right?
do that?
You want to maximize your earnings. My dad used to say, ring the cash register in your 20s. Right?
And that's the opportunity that's going away, like, because there isn't as the high techs are not hiring as much. That kind of rapid growth space is basically, that's the kind of cream off the job market that from my perspective is coming off. So that's where the tail down comes from. But lots of other people have been repositioning their careers. Again, you see the data about the number of people who changed industries and went to do something in a more secure, stable, more future-oriented kind of work piece. There's people who've repositioned their families so that they can have one person on gig, one person on employment, and manage the family life cycle that way. So there's at least three distinct categories of why this repositioning of work is happening. And then there's people who got burnt out and chose to change. Again, we've done some research on Boomerang. There's people who got burnt out who chose to change, realized the grass wasn't greener.
It was not greener, right?
and therefore, have gone back. And that's a sizable proportion. And good on those people for recognizing that. So, there's 4 different reasons why people are moving. And when your business is like, what's the one thing that makes people resign? It's like, you just have to be honest with them. It's not one thing. We have to work out which of those things is important to us and which of those people are important to us, so we can respond effectively.
And it's very interesting that you bring up this topic, because one of the things that you and I talked about was that, it's very interesting. Your perspective is based on who you ask, right? So we prepared another poll that I wanted to share with everyone. So let me share my screen. We prepared this other poll here. And the poll really is very basic. Like, where do you get your labor market insights from? Are you like Business Insider kind of person? Does Facebook basically paint your narrative for what's happening in the labor market? So let me launch this poll, and it would be really interesting to see and hear everybody's perspective about what traditional data sources, and what I mean by traditional, these are basically free or publicly accessible data sources. Do you use, as sort of the primary tool per se, like, to get your labor market insights from? And like before, I'm not letting anybody off the hook. We could certainly fill a lot of time. So do us a favor and go ahead and answer this question, so we could get like a pretty good sample size. I laugh about this because in the morning when I have breakfast, I try to get my 30 minutes of news, right? And after breakfast is over, I'm thoroughly depressed. So I start out all my mornings depressed because it's doom and gloom. I think it depends how you start your day in, right? About like what your perspective is on the labor market.
Absolutely. And I was reflecting on our earlier poll, Michael, and clearly we have a well-educated, well-informed audience today, and part of me goes, so there's the group who are connected to what's happening in the labor market. there is the broader general business population who I think are often operating off assumptions of how it was in the past. I don't remember who it was, the quote, but basically somebody recently said, why the CEO is the worst person to determine how work should get done in the future, because of that disconnect between what it means to work and what you experience when you're in the CEO's seat. So
I've been in both places, and it's very interesting. I've been the bearer of bad news, and I've been the recipient of bad news. I would take a flight from from Boston to San Francisco, and I'm on JetBlue, and I'm watching CNN the whole time. And by the time I land, I have this very interesting view of the labor market. But then I talk to somebody else that potentially reads the Wall Street Journal or something like that, or they listen to Fox News and they have like a completely different view of the labor market. And so then you come in like Willy Wonka, we got to do this, that, and it's not actually connected to reality. So anyway, we have 77% of the people participate. So I'm going to end the poll and show the results. As you can see, roughly 2/3 use a blend of everything. I thought phone a friend was great. I figured there'd be at least one person that would pick that, but clearly not a soul. About a third of you get your data from the BLS and the government, and about 2/3 get the data from a blend of lots of different sources. And I guess the last one is really the most pragmatic one. One of the reasons why is the follows. I prepared some other data that I thought was really interesting. This kind of highlights the kind of anecdotal nature, or it depends on who you ask how it works. For example, I did some searches around cloud engineers. It's like a very generic thing, and then let's look at supply demand of cloud engineers. So let's compare the totals. You can see there's roughly 150,000 cloud engineers in the US, and there's roughly 50,000 jobs, right? Anybody that's ever been in talent acquisition will say, well, that's not very good, because you kind of need like at least 10 to 1 to fill jobs. So wow, the labor market's really, really tight. If you look at it geographically, though, it's like a very different picture. You can see if you ask an IT manager in Washington, D.C., they'll tell you the market's ridiculously hot. I can't find any people. No wonder there's almost as many people as there are jobs, right? So that's crazy. But if you ask somebody in LA, they'd be like, man, it's relatively easy to fill jobs. The world is ending. The power is swinging back to employers, right? So you kind of have this like tale of two cities. And then the other thing too is about like wage inflation. So some really interesting stats, right? If you look at the wage, so this yellow line overlay here is this third axis. This shows you the average salary per region for these kinds of jobs. And what's wild is you could really see how the demand and supply imbalance here also creates high wage, versus here you just have like cost of living. Right. And so it's really, really interesting. And you're like, okay, if we have this remote culture, maybe we hire people in Dallas and Chicago, because these seem to be like really cool markets where we can be an employer of choice. There's relatively not a lot of demand at the relative, right wage. But the irony is, depending on who you talk to, they may either tell you the market is terrible or the market is amazing.
Yeah. And that's even within the US geography, let alone globally.
Yeah, for sure. And something else that I thought was interesting, this is kind of like applicable to all areas. We were kind of kicking around the idea of like, what does inflation look like and how does that relate to wage? So I basically did an analysis of entry-level salespeople and experienced salespeople, right? And we look at like the demand for talent in two areas. The yellow line represents the demand for experienced salespeople. The blue line represents the demand for entry-level salespeople. And if you look at the demand for entry-level sales, right, pretty much relatively flat over time. This is a period of a year. Here, I think that you had this huge run-up of expectations, and then, again, it kind of retracted back to historic levels. But there's an interesting backstory to this. So stay with me. If we look at salary trends, maybe this indicates why we see this. The blue line represents the compensation for entry-level salespeople, but the yellow line represents the concentration for experienced people. And we start to see this relatively deliberate convergence. Now, if you're a company, you've kind of like already tapped everything that you can tap here to get labor arbitrage, right? The issue is, you know, you have wage inflation. So now you're at a point like where an experienced person, you have to pay them exactly the same thing that you have to pay for an entry-level person. You're just going to hire more experienced people. Ooh, notice the uptick. And so there's a super interesting correlation about demand for labor and how that relates to wage inflation. So anyway, and I don't know if you had any perspective on this topic. I just thought it was like a very interesting topic.
No, the perspective, Michael, is like is where we started off the conversation, that, you know, the labor market that we're playing in is very, very, very tight, and to navigate it well, you're going to need not just real-time data, but real-time data to inform your business, because half the time it's not the people inside the sort of workforce space that have the challenge. It's educating the business on, you think this because you saw CNN or Fox News or whatever. You think this because your assumption from the last recession is that as the recession comes in, so too people hunker in their jobs. I think what we're both able to demonstrate from the data, this is not going to be like any recession we've been through before, and that navigating it is going to require this kind of precision and insight, specific roles, specific to your business, specific to your context, so you can make data-informed decisions. We all know they work better. In the past, getting access to this kind of insight, you know, we wouldn't have been able to have this live conversation about what's happening in the labor market. But we now have the technologies that we can listen on a daily basis, understand and respond as we're making those decisions. So I think it's exciting times because the tooling is here, but we're really going to need it to navigate through the waters we're in.
Yeah, for sure, especially that, you know, 15 years ago, information was not as readily available. We've had this datafication of our world, and it's really hit HR and in the world of work, right? And, you know, kind of relying on lagging indicators. There's a term, I read a book by Annie Duke. She's a famous poker player, right? I love Annie Duke. She has this term called resulting. Resulting is like, well, this worked in the past, therefore it's going to work in the future. You know, I split sixes before playing blackjack, and I got 2 20s. Let's just keep splitting sixes, right? It's a bad idea, but like it worked once. And so I think that, you know, to your point, the availability of what I would call current and relevant labor market data today is probably more so than it's ever been, right? And it's easier to get access to it so you can make more informed decisions, right? And the decisions aren't based on resulting, they're based on like what's actually happening. And so, you know, I think that there's an opportunity for businesses to take risk out of their decision-making process and make, you know, just more informed decisions. Not that every decision will be perfect, we know that, right? But we know they can make more informed decisions.
Yeah, data's going to help.
Anyway, I just realized we really quickly killed 30 minutes. It ran by really, really quickly. I enjoyed spending the time with you. Maybe you and I can do something else in the future as well. I've had some ideas for some upcoming webinar topics. I suggest everyone, if you're interested in this conversation and the topic in general, take a look at our website for some updates at claroanalytics.com. You can follow us on social media. Ian is probably one of the most followed people in our space. Lexicon of information. I suggest you hit him up on LinkedIn and Twitter and etc. And just keep an eye out for future events. And if this was interesting to you, we invite you to come back and join us again. Any last words, Ian?
No, just thanks to the audience. Thanks for the time today. It is a super interesting topic, and I think, you know, two takeaways is the data is available, and you may need to use the data to get you the rest of your business on side. Because I think, as I say, the people side of the business is kind of informed and ready. The rest of the business may be just falling back to their resulting. They're like, we did this last time, and so we'll do it again. We can promise you it's not going to work this time around.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much, Ian. I appreciate you joining me, my friend. Cheers, everyone. Be well.
Yeah. Thanks all. Bye.